Good morning and welcome back to the Carolinas CRE podcast. I'm here with Robert Martin of Carolina Holdings in Greenville, beautiful Greenville, South Carolina. It is 9:34 a.m. on June 9th, 2026. Robert, how you doing, man?
Hey, I'm great, Forth. How about yourself? How are things up your way?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you joining me today, Robert. I guess if being honest about it, he was a work contact first and we started working together and he's become a good friend at this point. So I hope he doesn't mind me saying that, but I want to learn about you guys, your history. This is the 40th anniversary of Carolina Holdings, and quick story on that. When I was young, I came back in 2008, worked for my dad. He always wanted me to make sure I put the year of the founding there. You know, that's a big deal. And I just kind of brushed it off like an old man thing. And I've found over the years that the companies that make it, it's so hard. The companies that make it a long time, they should brag about that and be proud of that. So Robert, tell me about Carolina Holdings. Tell me about 40 years and maybe a little bit about your tenure there.
Sure. Yeah. No, absolutely, man. Well, your dad hit the nail on the head, man. He's very wise to point that out. And, again, same boat, man. I mean, when I think about 40 years, I think about all the folks that have come through the doors. And really, it starts with the guy that founded it. Mike McNicholas founded the company in 1986 and had a vision for, making some things happen in Greenville. Greenville was just a sleepy little town at that point, not anything close to what it's become today. Mike was a smart guy, he'd come from a number of different markets and a couple of different backgrounds, but saw an opportunity to start something just with good people. And Mike's, if you've met him, Mike's just one of the best of the best. And so that's where we started, from the best of the best. And from his relationships and some of the people he brought on board, in particular Bill Masavic, they grew this company into something that was spectacular, doing projects from as small as a Brewster's ice cream to as big as building a new town outside of Nashville, Tennessee, Mount Juliet. We built Providence Marketplace there in the early 2000s, and just goes to show you, if you put your mind to it and you work hard and you develop your relationships and you're confident in what you can do, you can do wonderful things, even from a small little company in Greenville, South Carolina. So, they have stepped back and are chasing more golf balls than real estate deals. And so, Dave and Britt and I have been fortunate to try to pick up the mantle from where they left it and carry it forward. And so it's exciting to be talking about 40 years. And, you've been instrumental in helping us think about what the next 40 years could look like and how we get from 40 to 80 and beyond. So it's just an exciting time for us. Carolina Holdings is one of those companies that everybody kind of thinks they know a little bit about us, but we've done a lot of different things in a lot of different markets, and we're excited to share some of that with everybody this year.
Yeah, you talk to people about Carolina Holdings around the Carolinas, and everybody's familiar with you guys, and so that's part of what 40 years of success has done. So, all right, so you talked a little bit about the last 40 years. So, what's on the horizon for the next 40 years, Rob?
Well, we're definitely going to be getting a little bit younger, but who knows, man? I mean, I think sky's the limit. Honestly, we're in a great spot. Just from a market standpoint, I think just from a standpoint of where we are in our careers, some of the relationships that we've been able to develop here over the last 5-10 years that are bearing fruit today, and some of the deals that we're doing, I think all that stuff's great. I think Carolina Holdings will grow. I think we'll get a little bit bigger than we've been probably the last 10-15 years or so, as we add some folks to help chase some of these relationships and develop some of these relationships a little bit further. But that's kind of where it always starts, right? Is always starts in our business with relationships. And that's kind of how Carolina Holdings has grown, and that's how I think we'll continue to grow.
Nice, man. All right, real quick. I know you're a big golfer. I thought about this morning when I put this shirt on. What is the logo on your? Well, now I see it. It's Augusta. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
All right. So, Robert, how did you get to Carolina Holdings? Maybe walk through your path
Yeah.
at Clemson Emred from there. I offered tennis first, actually.
Yeah. So, my background is I went to Wofford. I played tennis back in the day when it was black and white TV, and it was a lot of fun. Followed a girl after graduation to Atlanta, and I went to work for a real estate developer there for about 5 or 6 years. Great experience where, I basically got put into sort of department where I work with brokers, developers, kind of the capital markets group, and sort of putting together pitches to go try to get business. And so I worked a lot with the capital markets group on financing structures and sell leaseback opportunities and things like that. But I got sort of a background in all the different aspects of a commercial real estate department. And the group I worked with was called Carter and Associates, and we had become the real estate arm of Bell South at the time. Bell South then became AT&T, but it really showed me a little bit about how commercial real estate kind of ebbs and flows, can ebb and flow pretty quickly based on who's leading the organization. Bell South at the time had leased a lot of different spaces in and around Atlanta, and Atlanta traffic was becoming more and more infamous. And so what they wanted to do to try to cut down on some of their employees getting in and around Atlanta was sort of consolidate around MARTA stations. So they hired us to go out, acquire, become developers, and build buildings for them. So we kind of pivoted to be that sort of arm for Bell South. And then about 5-6 years later, they decided that, you know what, we don't want to own all this real estate. We need to sell and lease these things back, and then maybe be a little bit more nimble as it relates to real estate. So just as quickly as we had put that sort of strategy into place, we pivoted to helping them sell the real estate and sort of monetize a lot of the assets they had on the books to go out and use that cash in their core business. They eventually got bought by AT&T, but it just kind of gave me a little bit of an insight into sort of how commercial real estate can be utilized by some of these companies to, based on what sort of their strategies they have in place. And so, I've always taken that with the different roles that I've had and sort of thought that, okay, really sort of our opportunity is to provide, counsel and ideas about how folks can use their real estate for their main business, whether that's, a technology company, whether it's a hospital group, whether it's a grocery store, whether it's a big company like, Bell South and AT&T. So, that was a pretty cool kind of formative stage for me. And Atlanta was great. The Braves were winning division titles, not World Series, but division titles back then. And we had a great time. And then the girl I followed, we got married and had our first kid and realized that, gosh, Atlanta is super expensive and you're going to have to move way out if you want to go to a decent school system. So we took that opportunity to kind of evaluate, moving back to South Carolina. I grew up down on the coast of South Carolina. So, really the jobs and opportunities down there were really more tourism related sort of opportunities and wasn't really seeing that as a good fit, but just a chance meeting with a guy here in Greenville about some of the things that they were doing. So it led to me being a part of an acquisition team on a sort of a different structure that was in place back in sort of the mid 2000s, which was tenant common syndications. So I worked for a group that was doing a lot of those. Really enjoyed my time there. Some really smart, talented people. We had some success through a debt mechanism that was very prevalent at the time. CMBS financing really helped spark a lot of our acquisitions. And this was a nationwide kind of thing. So there was lots of groups doing something similar to what we were doing. We were a very small player in the business, but we would raise equity through a broker-dealer network and then marry that with real estate opportunities. So the programs we did were pretty successful, but some of our brethren in the industry had some trouble sort of capitalizing their deals when inevitably real estate throws you a curveball. And so we actually became pretty adept at sort of taking over the management of some of those ownership structures. So when the market sort of turned in 2008 and the debt market sort of turned off, it became a little bit more of an asset management role for folks in that side of the business. So we got an MBA in sort of how to help handle distressed real estate and how to try to get investor groups sort of out of investment structures that weren't working out the way that they hoped. So we did a lot of talks with lenders. I had tons of conference calls. I wish I had Zoom back then because it would have been pretty interesting to see who we were talking to on the other end of the black box. But again, it was sort of like helping people develop a strategy about how to get what they wanted out of their real estate when maybe life had thrown them a curveball. And so it was great. I learned a lot. I mean, it was hard work because, there was a lot of tension involved at that point in time. And, this is where we had taken over some management of some assets where the sponsor had sort of bailed. The tenant maybe had moved out because the ownership wasn't able to provide some of the capital they needed for their structures. And we had to come in and develop a strategy to try to figure out how to make it work. And so sometimes those were successful. Sometimes, we got 50% of what we wanted. Sometimes we missed, and you had to sort of see it all the way through. So it was great. There's a lifespan in that role of probably, 3 to 4 years. I was probably there about that time. But then, to answer your question, it's just a chance meeting on the street with Bill Masabik. So the back to kind of the tennis world. So I grew up playing junior tennis all over the Southeast, and Bill's son Andy was a junior tennis player as well. So I'm a little bit older than Andy, but we played at the same tournaments, and we kind of all traveled as a pack. If you're from South Carolina and you're playing in some of these tournaments, so I'd known the Masabi's a long time, and bumping into him on Main Street in Greenville, and just sort of catching up on what we were up to, and he mentioned they were looking for an opportunity to bring somebody on board, and I said, well, shoot, let's sit down and have a cup of coffee. And 15, 16 years later, here we are.
So I'm listening to you talk about '08, and I guess you and I are getting to be the older guys now. And if you lived through '08, there's a reason it gets referred to, and it has all these different acronyms that just try to describe what it was like. And I don't think none of us even remember what it was like fully, what it felt like. But you learn so much in situations like that. If you were talking to a young guy right now, he's been in the business a few years. The getting's been good for a while. What would you tell him to try to train him up for a moment like '08 that's inevitable, or something of the like?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if you're like this, but to me, it was one of those periods of time where you didn't really maybe draw the broad conclusions about what was going on. You just because you were in it, right? You were just sort of like
Mm-hmm.
doing your thing, and you're sort of trying to figure out how you move from A to B, but you weren't necessarily as focused on what the macro was. And so this is so cheesy, dude. But
Bring it.
this is because I was just at this football camp my 13-year-old was at this weekend, and it was at Clemson. Everybody knows I'm a big Clemson guy, but Dabo was giving one of his speeches, and one of the things that he kind of falls back on a lot, if you've heard him talk, is just kind of bloom where you're planted, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes that's such a great lesson because, you might say, man, I've got to take this and jump to X, Y, or Z. And sometimes that's the right path. But, if you kind of just pour your efforts into being the best that you can be at that point in time, people are going to notice. And if you've got the work ethic that promotes in this world, then you're going to move in that direction, despite whatever macro events are happening. You just got to kind of pour yourself into the here and now, developing as many skill sets as you can. And, don't worry about what happens, you know, 5 years from now. Just worry about what you're doing today and setting the table for that, because that will serve you well. I didn't really think about, man, what was I going to do? I was just thinking about, man, I've got these 3 deals that I've got to figure out something to do on, right? And so, that led to, okay, well, that worked. Maybe I can take that one and do the next one like this. And so, you kind of, because you sort of concentrated on the here and now and not really maybe some of the noise that's out there, it really helps you kind of develop as a professional a little bit.
Yes, kind of a one day at a time approach. You're right though, because when you were
So,
in it, it was just adaptation, just
yeah.
survival, and
Yeah. Yeah. I think
but
so.
you got so much out of it if you did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I want to go a different direction here. So Robert and I are both alums of formerly football schools. All right. So we lament about this all the time, the NIL environment and cultural issues and stuff like that. So, just indulge us a little bit here. I'm going to throw Robert some curveballs. Robert, the best college football programs seem to win despite constant roster turnover. What's the business equivalent of building a culture that's bigger than any one person?
You talking about like a company? Like who would be a
Yeah.
company that would, I would say probably just like a branded group, just like Coca-Cola, right? I mean, I come in from an Atlanta background. Coca-Cola has been around for 100 something years, right? We talk about being the hippo in our organization a little bit. I mean, they've survived the diet drinks, the water, Coke is still like the brand that everybody kind of acclimates to. There's some of that, the blue bloods of college football, right? That's what you talk about is, the blue bloods of corporate business. But I'd say somebody like that, in our real estate business, I don't know that there's one that you just sort of think that's above all else. I think it's we all kind of ride the surf a little bit in that respect. But probably I would say somebody like a Coke or not even GE anymore, right? Because they've gone through some turbulence. But yeah, Coke would be the one that I would say that comes to mind.
Yeah. You mean the blue blood is like Texas Tech, right?
Yeah, no, 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 no. That would be green blood, I think.
Man, they pop up everywhere. I mean, the Women's World Series, I don't think they made the
Yeah,
Final Four, but they were pretty good tournament run, made the college football championship, not the championship, but the tournament. So, or the playoffs, I'm sorry. So, all right. Many coaches now spend as much time recruiting their own players as recruiting new ones. How has relationship building changed in business compared to when you first started?
Yeah, well, I think it's still the fundamental, right? To me, that's still the fundamental thing. We're not selling commodities. We're truly a relationship business, and everybody says that, but that's
Yeah.
really the heart of what we do. And it's changed, but it really hasn't. You know what I mean? Like maybe the way that you communicate with your relationships has changed. Your podcasts, your texts, social media, all that stuff. But it's still super important to touch base to kind of make sure that you're on top of, what they're involved with. And, I think the places in my career maybe where, sometimes have not gone as well as I've wanted is maybe I've gotten too busy to really focus on that piece of it, where I've said, rather than, hey man, I haven't talked to this guy in 6 months. Let me go see him. Let me go sit down with him. Let's go ride around. Let's go have a cup of coffee. I've sent an email, and that might be, a good lesson for, the younger me is like, hey man, let's cut that out. Let's definitely go see eyeball to eyeball, and you can do that through a video conference now if you have to, but spending quality time with somebody, that's why golf to me is such a great
Yeah.
avenue for our businesses. When you get untethered, guy for 4 hours,
Yep.
now they still might be in their golf cart texting, you know, and on the phone, but it's just great. I mean, it's a great way to get to know somebody. So I think that's still fundamental. But the younger generation, that's maybe you can tell some of the folks in our business that really have acclimated to that because they're touching base on many different levels, and I think those are the ones that will ultimately be successful. I think the ones that just robocall for the sake of robocalling, there's a necessary part of the business with the cold call, but that's never really going to bear fruit. I think you've got to really figure out an avenue and a way to have a warm intro to somebody to make it worthwhile because the relationship has to be two ways. It can't be a one-way street, right? Those relationships don't last. So if you can really connect with somebody on a level where they're getting something from your relationship and you are too, then that's what you want. And I think that fundamental is not going to change. Maybe the way that you do it changes a little bit. It used to be ICSE conferences were such a big component of our business and where everybody did a lot of sort of relationship building. But now, you can still do that. That's still available to you, but there's nothing to say that, we won't travel a lot more to go kind of see some of our relationships. We don't have to just do it in May and December. We can do that at many different times. So I think that's kind of what I see.
Yeah. So speaking of relationships, if you're you're the Dabo of Carolina Holdings, all right, and you're recruiting people or clients to CHI, what's your pitch?
I think Dabo likes to speak a lot. If you've heard his if you've heard his pressers, especially last year during the 7-6 season, about how many ACC titles he's won and national championships and how many people he puts in the draft and all that. I think we would have sort of a scoreboard mentality a little bit to say, hey, look, our pitch is, we've been there. We've been there from when Bilo was a grocery store here, when CVS was doing their expansion in the Southeast. We helped actually build their real estate programs to come down and do that. So we've been doing a ton of Publixes lately. We've done out parcel deals. We've built huge, open air lifestyle centers. We've worked with foundations. We've worked with institutions. So, we're not a one size fits all kind of group. When I say that, we're not a group that everything has to fit in a box.
Mhm.
And so we can work with a variety of different ownership structures, a variety of different partners, a variety of different tenants. So no 2 days are the same at our company. We've got a lot of different, ways that we operate. Everybody wears, some different hats, but it's what makes it exciting and it's what's provided runway. And when you have a calling card with a history like what we've got, it's strong. It's strong. And, it's not just, older history, it's recent history. And so, when we complete a project and take the professional photos and stick it on the walls, that becomes something that a calling card for us that we can point out to folks that come by to say, hey, yeah, we did this, we did that, we've been in this town, we've been in that town. And so, I think ultimately that, that 40-year history we started talking about at the beginning, that's the thing that I think excites, the future generations of CHI is that these guys have been there, done that. We've got that ability to sort of to bring that forward. And so, it doesn't have to be, we're going to follow this one group for the rest of our lives, because that's not how it's worked. We've had different relationships that have spanned different generations of our company. And so I'd expect that to continue. And as long as the fundamentals are in relationship building and just bringing in the right people that have the right objectives in mind, then we're going to keep doing great things.
Yeah. No, undoubtedly. All right. I ask a lot of people this. I have a theory that we're in the middle of a gold rush in the Carolinas. I was going to say in real estate, but just in general, in every sense you can call it. 30 years from now, us old guys are going to be sitting around the campfire telling the young guys how great the, 2020s were. What's your take on that theory and
Yeah, I
my
think
take there?
so. Yeah, I think there's been a lot of folks that have waited a long time for a market like this. And when I think about that, I think about, when I moved to Greenville in 2005, we drove past areas that you never would have thought would have been in the crosshairs of progress. Shoot, when I was in college at Wofford in 1997, my pledge brothers and I got dropped off in Bowling Springs, and they were like, "Find your way home.
I have,
Here's a
I have a
quarter
similar
for a
experience.
payphone," right? So, you know, now it's like, okay, there's like every national retailer and their brother, heck, Target built there. And, we did a huge project with Publix there. So, and it's doing great. It's one of those things where they wish they'd been there, sooner, because that town has really grown to handle all this national retail that's shown up there. So it's that part is amazing to see. Powdersville is another great example. So of a town you drive by 10, 15 years ago that's now, seeing so much growth. And so with that growth comes challenges. Obviously, you know, jurisdictions get tougher to build within. Infrastructure is something that South Carolina is paying attention to, but really needs to have a plan for, because lots of these rural communities, don't have sort of the sewer infrastructure, the traffic infrastructure to be able to handle what wants to be there. And so, that's something that, is certainly going to slow development a little bit in some of these markets, but it doesn't have to kill it. So certainly commercial developers are going to be a big part of making some of that stuff work. But yeah, it's pretty heady times for South Carolinians right now, and North Carolinians.
Yeah, it's a great time to be down here. All right, so I one last kind of business related question, maybe two, but and then we're going to talk a little straight college football. All right, we're going to stop with the analogies and the metaphors. So, what is one thing in your industry that everybody believes that you think is bullcrap,
Everything everybody believes is bullcrap.
or everybody says that's not true that you just vehemently disagree with?
Man, I didn't know there was going to be a test here this morning for. I don't know. I would say, in our role as developers and brokers, we do run into a little bit of, sometimes our brethren or some of the folks on the other side of the table from us, whether it be tenant rep brokers or landlord brokers, have a bit of bravado that, a certain deal point may be like the biggest deal killer shock of all time. So, sometimes you have to work your way through that BS on the front end just to get to the real nuts and bolts of it. But, there's nothing that's really like that I can think of that's sort of like a lightning bolt, that I would vehemently disagree on. There's nothing really that I can think of. I don't know if you've got some examples, but I can probably concur with some of the stuff you talked about.
No, I think somebody. Oh, actually, a couple weeks ago, I did one. A guy, his name's Lash Harrison. He said market rent is not a real
Okay, okay,
thing. So
okay,
that was his
okay.
theory.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. Developers make all the money. I think that's what I would vehemently disagree with. My wife can,
1.5%, right?
yeah, my wife can attest to that would not be the case. Yeah, that's probably it. All these, neighborhoods a lot of times, don't want to rezone something because these developers going to make all this money.
Yeah, evil
Yeah,
developers.
I wouldn't. I would say that's not the case. We usually get paid last.
Yeah, well, that's not usually. That's almost always.
Yeah.
So, all right, give me you have the table or the floor right now. What's the state of college football? Tell me your gripes, and if you're the commissioner of college football, how do you fix it?
Man, I'm really interested to see how this, Sorsby things turns out,
Yeah,
because,
it's pretty wild.
the first thing that I thought of yesterday when I heard about it was just like, why is everybody shocked that happened? I mean, so much is going off the rails. Like, why would you be like shocked? Because like some of these national pundits were just like, "Oh my god, I can't believe this happened." I'm like, "Really? You can't believe that this happened because it's
Yeah.
happening
There's
in
no
every other
precedent for it.
aspect of
Yeah.
sports." But I heard a theory this morning that I might be warming to, but the theory was like, this is the best thing that could have happened to the NCAA because, like, they have no teeth in anything they can do because anytime somebody doesn't like a ruling against their school, they can go to a local judge and have them overturn it. It's happened with Ole Miss's quarterback. It's happened with, tons of examples, right? So, like, maybe it just needs to go that direction because it's so broken and it's so off the rails that folks will finally be like, all right, that's the Rubicon, that's the one that, straw that broke the camel's back is we got to have some rules. And then we'll argue about what the rules should be for the next, infinite period of time. But, just the reason we all got into college sports, and again, you got to modernize, but the reason you got into college sports was, love for your school and, it actually does educate you. Having an education, I think, is still important in this world. It doesn't need to be diminished, but there's got to be some structures in place to make it a little bit more, palatable. And again, like I played a non-revenue sport in college. I'd hate to see that go away on a macro level because we've got to buy more linebackers and defensive backs and wide receivers. I mean, that would be a shame. I think I heard the AD for Stanford talking on a podcast recently, and I thought he was talking about all the Olympians that came out of Stanford,
Mhm.
and if
Yep.
some of those programs go down because they're trying to fund, you know, being better in football or basketball, that'd be a shame. So, hopefully there's a way to, have some equality for what's going on because it's definitely off the rails.
Yeah, it really is a good point, and I don't think a lot about the non-revenue sports, but I was, in Boone this weekend, and everybody knows my position on Upstate sports, but they've made a lot of investments in the track and field facility. They are making a lot of investments in the tennis facility, indoor and outdoor right now, and I was walking around, I love walking a construction site, and I thought, "This is actually kinda cool." I mean, uh, App had a singles player make it, I wanna say, to the Final Four last year.
Yeah.
I think we've got a pole vaulter in the national championship right now. Those things would be lost if we just went all in on the rev sports, which, I mean, honestly, I don't go to any track meets. I don't go to any tennis matches, but I was about to say tennis games. So, I go to football games, basketball games, and baseball games, but it
Yeah.
is kind of nice that there's that, broad swath of opportunities to go and do great things no matter where you're at. But all right. So you're the commissioner. You have all the power in the world, all the resources. How do you fix it with the stroke of a wand?
Man, I think you probably have to have collective bargaining. You have to have both sides, have representation, get to a common ground, and then you got to have the schools want to do that.
Hmm.
You can't have the six richest schools be like, well, I think our cap should be $200 million a year, right? It needs to be more NFL, not MLB, right? I think that's how it's gonna work. So if you could wave a wand, I'd say you just, look something like the NFL where you've got strict rules, you got a salary cap, and people abide by those rules. I think that's the best way to do it. And maybe it goes back to kind of what it was when I was growing up. Like Wofford was a D2 school and they played for a national championship against schools that were in the same, zip code as what they were, and so that was great. My father-in-law won a national championship for Wofford when he played golf in the 70s. And that was cool. They still bring those guys back and celebrate them every year as the first national champion at Wofford, and so, I think that would be, I think that's how it should work, like, Wofford doesn't need to be playing Clemson in football and, they're a different animal in that respect, right? But we need to compete for our own championships and different sports with the teams that are equipped to handle those same rules, I think.
Yeah. We got to do something about tampering as well. Because otherwise, the Woffords become, the minor leagues
Yeah,
of the big guys.
that's right.
Which,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm a free market guy. I want people to have freedom of movement, but you know,
Yeah.
I'd like to see a little bit on that front.
Right. I mean, like when we were growing up, you had to sit out a year, right? And so that
Hmm.
stops some of that. I mean, I think that's the fairest way to do it. If you can transfer where you want to go, that's fine, but sit out a year, you
Yeah.
know? And
Yeah.
I think that will stop most of it, would
All
be
right.
my yeah. Go back. Go back.
Yeah. No, we probably sound like old men,
Yeah, yeah.
yelling from the front porch, but I guess this is where we are now. So, all right, Robert, last question. Wrap this thing up. Let you get on to doing more important things. 5 years, we're having this conversation, and it's been the best 5 years of your career. What has to happen between now and then for that to be true?
Yeah, I think we've got some good things going on right now that you and I have talked about. I think we've got to get some more folks to help us kind of grow the brand a little bit. Maybe do, if we're doing 2x now, we'd want to do 4x. I think that's where we haven't spent a lot of time is sort of building out those branches of our company, and I think that's kind of what we're working on with you as well is doing that. So I think we've got to add some muscle in a few areas, to help devour some of the business that we're bringing in, and then continue to grow it. And I think it's developing some more relationships based on the stuff that we've done. Certainly we've got a good run going on the grocery business. There's lots of other sort of retail focused companies that are now looking at the Carolinas because of the growth that we've had down here. So I think it's identifying who those are, showing them our track record, helping them become a part of some of the centers that we're developing to, just keep this thing going. Cause I think, we're very lucky. I don't think people are going to stop moving to the Carolinas. I think the Southeast will continue to sort of be the center of sort of business focus for a long time. And so, it's being able to point out our successes, being able to identify opportunities to bring some of these folks in. I think that's what we'll continue to do and just add some horsepower to doing it.
So, well, I'm excited to see that, and I hope you'll continue to let me be a part of it, Robert. And hope you have a great week. And I appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah, Fourth, absolutely, man. Good to see you.
All right, talk to you soon, buddy. Bye.
All right. Thanks.